Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to do a lightning lesson on the Product Leader's Guide to Executive Search. If you're a product executive and are either actively on a job search or just curious how you're going to prepare yourself for your next job search, this is the right place for you. I'm also running a second free lightning lesson later this evening, so 6 p.m. PST, 9 p.m. EST, with Bobby Gormson, who's another seasoned executive recruiter who's worked at places like TrueSearch, Riviera, and was the head of talent at Etsy. And so I definitely recommend also joining there or at least signing up for it so you can get the slides afterwards. Somer here is my guest today. We are very, very grateful to have Somer join us. Somer is a 20-year executive recruiter, and most importantly to me recently is that she's the author of my new favorite book on the topic of demystifying executive search for job candidates, which is Search in Plain Sight. And I listened to the audiobook. By the way, you have a great audiobook voice. So yeah, so let's I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll hand it to Somer to talk about her. For those who don't know me, although you probably have seen my content if you're signing up for this, I'm a seasoned product leader. I have worked at places such as Patreon, Noom, Udacity. I have been on several executive searches, and I've helped and coached many product leaders on their executive searches, their executive job searches. And so I've had the pleasure of working with lots of executive recruiters, lots of founders, executives at big tech, all the way down to startups. And yeah, I'm hoping to share that knowledge with you today. But let's learn a little bit about Somer. Somer, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to this world and helping the folks in the executive search space.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that lovely intro. And Colin, I'm just so honored to be invited to be here with you. So grateful to be here. And yeah, the audiobook, it was not easy. And I had to speak out loud. And what I did to just not talk so fast is I actually spoke out loud with my hands to myself. And it looked very silly to anyone watching the situation. But anyway, just to make myself pause. But yeah, I've been recruiting since '02, so 22 years. I'm known for mainly VP plus, C-level, some director level tech and product searches, but I also work across other functions too, marketing ops, things like that. And yeah, and I work with, a lot of big companies, a lot of startups too, and across the board. My background's financial services, but then it went into cross industry. Started out in contingent, went to retained later. I was at CT Partners, and I think that's interesting because I was trained by folks from Spencer Stewart and Heidrick. So I think I have this unique perspective of seeing all the different ways recruiting's done, being at big firm, being a boutique, being contingent, being retained. And yeah, started my own firm in 2020, a month before COVID. So I had time to write a book. And here we are. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's more than I can say I got done during COVID. I was not writing books, sure. Yeah, well, great. Thank you. And the community is really, really glad to have you here. I wanted to get started, and there's an agenda of what we're going to go through today. We're going to do an icebreaker question to get a sense of who's in the audience here and learn a bit more about you all. We're going to talk a little bit about understanding executive search, and hopefully you have some sense of what this is, but we'll give you a brief primer on that. But we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about how you can really become a job search magnet and get in front of executive recruiters, but also be seen as the number one candidate for the recruiters. And during that time, we're going to do a couple of activities. We're going to help you all. So make sure you have, if you're active and you're at your desk, you're able to write your magnetic statement. We're going to give you a few minutes to do that. And we're also going to ask a few folks to share their LinkedIn's, and we're going to choose one to see how Somer actually goes through a LinkedIn profile and screens them, and what are the things that will pop up in search for her. Somer and I will also talk about our book and my Maven program that's coming up at the end of this month on the product executive job search. And we'll have plenty of time, not just at the end for Q&A, but we're going to have little moments in between to ask Somer and myself some questions. So let's get started. So first is an icebreaker. For those who have chat available to them, please type in these three things: your biggest job search challenge, the role you're after, and your location. So a good concise example of this would be turning info chats into opportunities, if that's your challenge. You're looking for VP at a Series C consumer company and San Francisco. So I'd love to see some folks type in chat. What's your biggest challenge? What role were you after, and where are you located? Oh, and Abbas, thanks for recommending Somer's book there.
Thank you so much.
Oh, okay, we got some folks coming in. Getting executive recruiters to call you, interesting. Oh, there was a fun LinkedIn post on whether executive recruiters should cold call you, but I think you mean reach out. Finding opportunities at B and C companies, CPO VP. I got VP product at a mid-sized B2B, Colorado. That's good to know. Some of the little secondary tech hubs there, Texas, Oklahoma. Yeah, looking for remote jobs. That's an interesting one. Finding jobs that I'm passionate about, recruiters and inbound calls, getting no responses from applying to job posts. You win 99% of everyone else
Mm.
these days. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm seeing some patterns. Please keep sending those in, and we'll keep an eye on them as we go. But it's good to know you all. So I got a couple of very different messages from folks in my community after I started teaching online about executive search. And this former VP of product at Salesforce in a Series F unicorn reached out to me and said, I followed the playbook and now I have a dozen interviews lined up. And this was just a few days after I posted my article. And so he said, great job and much appreciated. So this is amazing to see. And I've actually coached this individual after that, but it's not the experience uniformly across everyone. I just got this from a senior vice president last week, which says, I've reached out to all the executive search companies you posted about through email and LinkedIn and followed up multiple times. And unfortunately, not one of these companies had acknowledged my outreach or responded in any way. And I went on to have a deeper conversation with this person, and we realized a couple of things. One, they have a lot of misconceptions we'll go over today about what an executive recruiter and what executive search firms do and what role they play. And second, they didn't really have the right positioning for how they're going to go about doing this. They didn't have the right strategy for outreach, and they didn't really know how to talk about themselves in the way that will resonate with recruiters. So hopefully we can put more of you in the bucket of the individual number one here. I'll also talk about my aha moment here. So when I was the leading product and design at Udacity, I decided I wanted to take a next step and go to another company. And I really wouldn't have had any idea how to go about this. None of the roles were posted online, and there was no compensation data. I was just kind of in the dark. But I was very fortunate that my previous CEO at Udacity, who wasn't there at the time, had taught me this early on, which is first, you got to find great executive recruiters. And second, you need to build long-term relationships with them. And honestly, this has served me so well over the years. Now I have executive recruiters in my network that know me and trust me. And they know that because I've impressed them when I've gone in front of hiring teams and after they saw me get offers or pass interviews. And I know and trust them because I know that they can now market me properly. They know how to prep me, and I know that they're going to take care of me during the process. And so now, whenever I want to go on a job search, I can activate my network anytime I want. I can get relevant opportunities and intel and plenty of inbound opportunities as well. But this doesn't happen overnight. So we're going to talk about what it takes to actually get to this point. And since then, I've landed offers for a public VP of product role, big tech director roles at some very big companies you'll know, pre-IPO, CPO, VP, and senior director roles. And this was entirely like, I think only one time I got an opportunity through cold applying. This is all through my network and reputation. But it doesn't mean that I was just passively sitting around for things to come into my inbox. And this did not come from me just spamming a bunch of cold messages to recruiters, which a lot of folks have done since I've introduced them to the concept of executive search. And I made an investment to go to think beyond just this one job search I'm in at the time. And that has paid off for me over my career. So understanding executive search. Many of you have probably seen this in my newsletter, but as you get more senior, the fewer and fewer roles are publicly posted. And even if they are posted publicly at, let's say, the senior director level or director level, they are very often filled by people who come with reputation, with a network, with some connection internally, or someone else talking about them and not just their own cold resume application. And so you really need to tap in, especially as you get up to the VP plus level, into this kind of hidden network of jobs. And we're going to demystify that a little bit. You've probably also seen this map I've posted online about the different types of executive search firms. We're not going to go into detail into all of them. There are big firms that deal with the Fortune 500 companies. They're your mid-market tech firms like Diversa, Riviera, True, who handle a lot of the hypergrowth product placements. And then lots and lots of boutique firms, which are usually, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Do you mind muting yourself? Here, let me mute that individual. Oh, I do not have the ability to mute them. I can you see if you're able? Oh no, you wouldn't be able to. All right, I'm gonna just unfortunately move them to the wait room because there is no way for me to mute them. Great. So the boutique firms are founded typically by partners from the mid-market and big five firms, and they usually go out on their own, and you will find a lot of them. So we know now that there's all these executive search firms. A lot of the executive roles come through these firms, but how do they actually work? And before we answer that question, I want to gather some questions for Somer from the audience. So what I want you to do is throughout this process, if you can type in the chat any questions that come up along the way. I have my content marketing buddy here, Mo, who's going to be going through the questions and making sure that we are able to answer them. So if you do have an ability to ask a question in chat, please do so. I'm going to start with my own question for Somer, though. Before we answer what do search firms actually do you have any other thoughts on the landscape of search firms? There are so many firms out there. And should a candidate just go out and start like making a big list of these firms and approaching these recruiters? And like, how do you handle this information now that you have it?
Yeah, it's a lot. What I would say, and I think first of all, it's fundamental to understand that every hiring company will partner with a different search firm exclusively for a certain area for a certain period of time. And no one advertises this stuff. So we have to be a little bit of a sleuth. If you want to work at a certain company, you have to be like, what firm's working with them right now? Right. So it's really important to think about not just the firm, but the person, because all these relationships are people ultimately. And you'll see people jump firm to firm to firm, and the client base will follow different people. So my recommendation is to think more about the person and the people that you should know in executive search, more so than the brand that they work with.
That's a great question. People and not just the firm name itself.
Correct.
Yeah. And does just because you've contacted an executive recruiter at a firm, does that mean that you're automatically being considered for all the roles that that firm is dealing with?
I'm sure you know the answer to this one, which is no. And yeah, I mean, first of all, let's assume the firm has awesome data entry and your details and information resume went into the database, but I wouldn't always assume that. But at the end of the day, it's a very clunky relationship oriented process. And so it really comes down to being manually thought of, like someone thinking of you. And then of course later they'll search and whatnot. But it's not a situation where everyone in the firm, there's 1,000 people sitting around a table discussing, hey, I have all these searches I'm working on. Who do you know? It's a lot more clunky than that. So it's important to know all the different folks across the firm, different practices, partners down to associates. And yeah, we'll talk about how, but because you don't want to just spam all of them the same email. But yeah, I wouldn't assume if you know one person, you're like, I know one person at Korn Ferry, done. Korn Ferry is off the list. Work that way.
Exactly. All right, Mo, do we have any great questions from the audience?
Yeah, the one that's come up multiple times is just, okay, what's the next step? Let's say you know which type of recruiting firm or search firm that you want to approach. How do you do it? How do you reach out to them? Who at the firm do you reach out to, etc.?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that in different ways. So go ahead, Colin.
No, I was just going to say we're going to cover some of that here today, but I think maybe the one comment you're probably going to hear here is it's not necessarily the right framing of the question. That is not necessarily the next step, is to just start cold outreaching to folks. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
That makes sense. Another one is, can you explain how executive recruiters make decisions about matching candidates with hiring managers based on things like team size, domain experience, hard skills, prior brand name companies and work experience, etc.?
Yeah, I think quickly it comes down to the, I guess, the sophistication and insight that the executive recruiter has about the open position. Ideally, we're taking a huge intake, a huge briefing meeting with the hiring manager and understanding the journey that the company's about to go on and how this person will lead that journey. And then we're matching journeys. So it's not just stats, it's not just team size, it's really what you're walking into, where they're going to get things to, and have they done that before, and at least in some capacity.
And then search firms sometimes have a specialization. Is there a way to figure what that might be if it's not publicly available?
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to how you're finding the recruiters in the first place. And I would recommend finding them through people, and people will tell you what they do. So yes, I would go that route and ask your network and always start there versus combing through websites.
All right, we're going to have plenty of questions, and we'll keep gathering the questions for later. So just because we didn't answer it now doesn't mean we won't get to it. We're going to have a big Q&A session at the end. All right, so I loved this part of the book, Somer, about what executive recruiters do, and more importantly, what they don't do, which is a big misconception. So recruiters find candidates for jobs, not jobs for candidates. And you pulled this quote, which was, you're not going for a specific job. You're building relationships with multiple recruiters so that when the job does come, they know to reach out to you specifically. Do you want to elaborate a bit on this?
Yes, I think this is the number one misconception. And when I decided to write the book, I reached out to all of my recruiter friends at other companies, and they said, number one, hands down, most folks approach us recruiters thinking we're going to help them get a job. And I think once folks realize that it's really more about we're working for the hiring company to find the top 5, 10 people in the world for that job, it's a reframing of how you talk to recruiters. It's not about, do you have a job for me? Can you help me get a job? What do you think of my resume? It's more about being remembered for the right thing later. So a lot of what we talk about now is how to be that memorable person so that when the role comes up, you're thought of. It's not help me get a job. It's nuanced, but it's different.
And I'll talk a little bit about how the search process actually works, but I won't go into too much depth. So if you want to know more, just ask questions. But typically, when a executive recruiter or search firm is hired, they'll first develop a search strategy and a target list of candidates with the company. Then they'll create this kind of market map of who are the candidates out there, what is it kind of looking like based on this role definition, and they'll get feedback from the client about those early candidates in the market. And then they're probably only going to introduce about the top 5 to 10 candidates to that employer at any given time, that hiring manager. And so they're not looking for just, hey, this is a candidate who is, qualified for this job, but is this one of the top 5 to 10 candidates in the world for this specific role? How do you see this?
Yeah, exactly. I think a frustration I hear from a lot of job seekers is like, I looked at the job description. I am perfect. Like, why can I not go forward for this? Like, check all the boxes. And the tricky thing is, it's like, of all of let's say the recruiter reached out to 200 people for the role, and then, 50 came back, they interviewed 30. Like, are you in the top 5? And have you been endorsed by someone that they trust? And is your boss also on the same shortlist? Is the folks under you on the same shortlist? Or is there another person at your company on the same shortlist? So like the diversity of slate, just the qualifications. So it's really about presenting and interviewing as being top 5 versus qualified. So there's a lot to talk about there, but yes, there's a lot of methodology behind what we do to find folks and also to assess them.
Great. And I think we've talked about the misconceptions. Are there any other misconceptions we should think about at search firms? And then Mo, I'd love to take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I think we talked really quick about, knowing one person at a firm. And I would even say sometimes people think if I know the partner, like that checks the box. I would honestly say knowing the associate or director or maybe even researcher is sometimes even more important than knowing the partner, because those are the folks doing all of the initial candidate outreach. And when I was an associate at a big firm, I was basically treating my partner as the client. I'd be like, I talked to this candidate. He's great. Here's why. You should meet him. He's one of the best I talked to. So I'm doing all this stuff internally. And I'm the one remembering the candidates for next time, for next year, for the other search. I'm the one looking through past searches for candidates. The partner's doing business development. They're presenting the clients. They're important, clearly. But in terms of getting to know the search firm, I would say those folks on the team that you may think, they're junior, I know the partner, I'm good. Like I treat them equally as important.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you'll find is this like mix that when you get to the partner level, they'll know the best way to pitch, to understand the market, to position yourself and the client really well. They can tell those stories the best, but then they're less on the ground with the search. Whereas the people that are more junior are like, I have these 4 searches right now. I need to like help you. I need you in my network to
Yes.
help place this role. But then they're probably less seasoned at being able to tell your story and get the right roles and matches in front of you. So there's a trade-off, and that's why you should probably reach out to a bit of both.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
All right,
Real quick
Mo,
on
any
the.
oth-
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to say on the misconceptions, someone had asked me if they had withdrawn for a role or said no to a role, or if they were a no for a role, like the client didn't like them. Will that search firm, are they like blacklisted? Like, will the search firm think of them for another role? Like, it really comes down to how you respond, how communicative you are. Did you do it with grace? Did you keep them in the loop? Of course, not every role is perfect for everyone. So I just think, it's doors are open. Just keep them open. I would just throw that in there, because sometimes people think, oh, I was a no, or I said no, and they're not going to call me again. That's not the case at all.
Mo, let's take one question. What's the a question from the audience here?
I'm going to combine 2 questions here just because I think they get at the same thing. Clifton asks, how do you know if a role at a company you're interested in will be filled by executive recruiters? And Sabrina asks, when does a company engage an external recruiting firm versus doing it themselves?
In terms of how do you know, I don't know how to know other than just knowing. I think if you just Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. I think it is or it isn't. And I think you'll just find out one way or the other. If you apply directly, you contact someone at the firm, they'll route you. When we're retained, no matter how you find the role, you're coming to me. So I think you'll just find out versus them publicly announcing it or something. But in terms of no, like, why do firms use external executive search firms? And so there's a number of reasons for that. I'd say number one is really capacity. If the internal search firm just has or internal recruiting team has so much work on and they need dedicated just resources for this search. That's one. Another is what if it's confidential? Sometimes the company wants to let someone go, make a change, or there's like a pending merger or just something that they can't post or get out. Like they'll have a confidential search run by an external party. Sometimes they don't have internal depth in that area. It's a role that doesn't turn over very often. So there's a number of reasons. But yeah, the firms I work with tend to also have internal recruiting teams, and we work really, really closely together.
And unfortunately, you don't not only do you not know that the target company is hiring using a search firm, but you won't even know when they're hiring because a lot of the time they're just not posting it.
True.
And so the way to understand like what's out in the market is through people, well, just as Summer said. All right, I'm going to go through this very briefly because I do want to get to the how very quickly, but I want to just reiterate what are some of the incentives and perspectives from a recruiter. Firms are paid by the client, and recruiters, when they do placements, they do get incentives per placement. And so just understand that when they're putting you in front of clients, that they are incentivized to close the role. They're not incentivized by making sure that you get placed somewhere. And their investment is used more about their future network. The second thing to note is that their priority is to find candidates that make them look good to their clients, right? Like their reputation is primarily, and the person who's paying them is the client. And so if they put people in front of clients, the worst thing a hiring manager wants to do is spend 15 minutes or 30 minutes of their time with the wrong candidate. It will honestly pee them off. And even if you put a resume in front of a client who is not, I've been on the client side of this, so I can say it from the client side. If you put a resume in front of me that's not good, that's not a fit, and you don't have a really good argument with evidence of why they're actually a good fit, even if it doesn't seem so on paper, then I'm going to think less of you as a recruiter, and I will be less engaged, and maybe less engaged. I'll just lose trust in you. And I'm sure that from the recruiter side, you feel that too, Somer. And then they specialize in certain stages, sizes, industries. I think we talked about that. And they run about 5 to 10 searches at a time. Is that about right, Somer?
Depends on the firm and, but I'd say typically, yes. The larger the firm, the more resources they have, like shared pools sometimes or dedicated folks for research and name generation and stuff. So those numbers can skew up or down. But yeah, that sounds about right.
All right, so now let's talk about some of the ways that you can become a job search magnet and actually start getting opportunities coming your way. Somer, this was something you talked about in your book about like when you get a search, who are the first folks you go to? And I think understanding this will help us understand how exactly we're going to get into those lists as candidates.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So, and I'm glad that this resonated from the book. And yeah, I think that whenever we kick off a search, like I was saying earlier, so the client's telling us, okay, we're looking to hire this person. We're about to go through this journey. We're going from here to here. Here's what they're walking into. Here's who they're interfacing with. Here are the roadblocks they'll face. Here's how we define success. So now we all sit down as a search team, or now I sit down and look at myself and I think, who has done this journey before? So it's a super, like the first people I call, I'm not talking about canvassing the whole world, just like the first people I call, they are just in my brain. They're memorable. I thought of them. I remember the journey, like they just implanted something. So they come to mind. After that, past candidates, I always look through past searches, like what's a similar search I've done before. I have statuses for everyone. So I'll say, not interested, disqualified, withdrew, whatever it is. So I'll sort by status. So moral of the story there is respond to me, because if it's like not responsive, like I'm probably not going to call you again, or maybe you'll be last, right? But people that were helpful, they gave names, stuff like that. So people that interviewed well, they took feedback well. Past targets, like I said, not interested but responsive. And then of course, past candidates from colleagues. Like when I was at CT Partners, we just literally walk around in Manhattan, like the floor, and say, "Hey, I have this role. Who do you know?" Some of this stuff is kind of archaic, but it comes down to reputation and relationship.
Exactly. Which means you also want to be fresh in people's mind. So let's talk a little bit about who you talk to then second.
Yes. And so after that, so usually going through that exercise, I'm starting to get names from people I know. So the moral of the story here is be the name people give to recruiters. So plant those seeds. Hey, I'm igniting my search confidentially. Here's what I'm really good at. Here's what I'm known for. Here's what I'm targeting. So if recruiters call you and you're not interested, have them call me, trying to get those leads to come to you, because I'm calling those referrals next.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something I see a lot of resistance for is people are like, "Oh, like I don't want to talk to my, my peer or my former boss or someone like that and talk about my job search. Like it's a waste of their time and mine to do that." But the idea is if they don't know you're searching and they don't know what you're looking for and they don't know how to talk about you, then when something comes across their desk, an inbound from a recruiter, they're not going to know to refer you. And so it's really important. And like just yesterday, Sommer told me about a search and I had two people that just happened to tell me that they're searching, and I gave her those names, and they might be great fits. So that's a really important part: is tell your network. You could be very confidential, but tell your network that you're looking and what you're looking for exactly. And then who do you go to next?
Yeah, then after that, I go through I create a search strategy. We kick off a search and it has a target list of companies. And I go through and I do a lot of Boolean strings and title searching and LinkedIn searching. I use Hire Easy, which searches data dumps from LinkedIn every 6 months. And it searches its own ways with its own parameters, it's pretty awesome, to be honest. Then I search my own database. But I love LinkedIn because LinkedIn is fresh and new and people keep their own profiles up to date. And it reminds me of who I already know a lot of the time.
Mo, let's start with questions from the audience.
Yep. So Paul asks, how do search firms work with in-house recruiters? I've had both reach out for the same role.
Those are two different. Well, I guess one's a question, one's a statement. The statement, I don't know why both would reach out for the same role, unless maybe it's a contingency search and perhaps the recruiter is paid on placement, not a retained search where they're partnering every week and sharing insights and findings and candidates in the landscape and stuff like that. Because typically, once or a lot of the time, like I'll get retained after a company's tried to fill it on their own. Sometimes it's fresh, brand new, but a lot of the time it's like, look, we gave it 2 months, we can't wait any longer, and then they give it to me, and then at that point, the internal team is no longer doing outreach. But your first question, really quick, is we all play different roles. I don't work at the company, so the internal recruiter has a lot more insight on culture. They have a lot more access to getting feedback in a timely fashion. They're on Slack or GChat. I don't always have that set up with other companies. They do a really good job sometimes prepping the clients, before the interviews, so that when the candidate shows up, that sort of stuff. Whereas sometimes I don't. So yeah, so they do a lot of like the internal communication prep and feedback, and sometimes offer negotiation after I tee them up with the right kind of information. So we all work closely together.
You also mentioned a little bit about your search strategy on LinkedIn. Celine asked, can you share more about how you use LinkedIn to search candidates, including examples of queries that you might use?
Yeah, like it's a lot of like and ors, to be honest, and in parentheses and quotes and stuff like that. Like so for example, director might mean different things at different companies, VP might mean different things. So I'll search for multiple titles to capture the right level or head of, so it could be this or that. I can include different product development or product manager, or so you can look for various things, and you can look for SaaS, or so just lots of keywords. So yeah, I could bore you to death on Boolean searching.
I think what would be useful is what kind of what level of specificity do you put in there? Are you saying like I'm looking for 100 million to $1 billion SaaS company that's like Series B through D? Like, are you going into that depth? Do those keywords matter on someone's LinkedIn profile? Like, how deep are you going, or is it more broad than that?
So LinkedIn isn't great at that. And I will say on your LinkedIn profile, make sure that you've selected the right industry. They select your right city. I've heard don't just put San Francisco, put like San Francisco Bay Area, just in case people are doing a certain search, because you're going to not show up in everything. And also like pick your correct industry, because LinkedIn changes these drop downs sometimes. And then what I see on my end might be different than what you inputted and you won't show up. But I think I've seen that candidates don't always write down Series A, or they don't write these words. They don't even say SaaS a lot of the time. Like they'll just assume like, of course, my company's a SaaS company, or why would I even say that? But if you want to show up in a SaaS search, then you might have to say SaaS. That's why I use Hire Easy, to be honest, because I can actually search for what are the Series A, Series B. Like it actually does do that. It has buckets of companies. Because what I like to do is I like to go company by company or buckets of companies by companies and then narrow it down versus if you just put like if you put just CPO or chief product in LinkedIn, you're gonna get a million people and that's just too many. Yeah.
Great. And one other question I had was I've had a lot of folks come to me who are, coming from a different city or coming from a different industry where they have great product leadership experience, but it's in a traditional financial services company or the digital arm of a retail company. And
Mm.
they don't know many people directly who are in Silicon Valley tech, for example. How should a person like that go about it if it's about knowing people?
I think it's for that question, I would not assume that people don't know people, to be honest. Like there's that second degree network that if you ask folks, hey, I'm really targeting this, who do you know who's made that transition or who do you know? So it's a lot of work, but I really think having fewer conversations that are deeper with great people will lead you to that. So people might think I just do a lot of financial services recruiting, but do they know I'm working with a 45 person startup right now? But so it's like you just never know unless you ask. And I would just say, ask people who they know. But in terms of talking about yourself, I would just make sure not to use too much industry jargon. I do find that when people have been at the same industry or same company for 20 years, 15 years, they use a lot of words that might not cross over. Like I did a lot of work in financial services, so I know if you did equity trading or that sort, like you understand regulation and just certain aspects of tech. But I would think more about the journey that you've taken companies on, the problems that you solve, the value that you add, and that can be applicable to Silicon Valley companies, not just direct industry companies.
So let's talk a little bit about what it means to, start becoming a magnet for opportunities. And I really liked how you framed this in the book.
Yeah. So, like we were saying earlier, it's all about realizing recruiters aren't helping you get a job. So, how do you frame the call then? How do you frame these conversations with them so that you're the person they think of in a month from now, 3 months from now, in a year from now, and 3 years from now, right? Because I have people like that I've known for 10 years and I think of them. So, it's really about these things. It's having relationships, it's planting the right seeds so that you're memorable, it's being visible and it's giving value. So we're gonna dive a little bit into these.
Yeah. So first, like developing a clear personal brand. It's about cultivating meaningful relationships with recruiters, staying visible in your industry. And this was an interesting one. I think I've heard a lot more about. I used to discount it more, which is about even though I'm a content creator online, I thought it was actually less important for your job search. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on just being visible in your industry, speaking engagements, online content.
Yeah. And first of all, I will say that LinkedIn, when I search for candidates in LinkedIn Recruiter, people that are active on LinkedIn show up earlier in my search results because LinkedIn wants me to love LinkedIn. And LinkedIn doesn't want me to send lots of emails, which I pay for to have them just go into the abyss. So LinkedIn will prioritize people that are on LinkedIn that are responsive. So I'd say, first of all, if you're on LinkedIn and you're posting and doing things, you'll show up in more searches just by nature of being on LinkedIn and LinkedIn loving you and wanting me to see you. But also, I will say, like, I'll be working on a search and then I'll see a post by someone like, I should totally ask that person about this thing. And maybe it's someone that I haven't talked to in a year or maybe a year and a half or 2 years. But even if not for them, like, I'm like, they are so in this ecosystem. And hey, it'll be a good excuse to say hello and that sort of thing. So I think being visible is so important.
Yeah, and we'll go deeper on this, but being able to offer value is part of this equation, and we'll talk a bit about how to do that. So, talk me through this concept. I really like this concept. You said that at the beginning of the search, there's this bucket one, two, and two of
Mhm.
people you reach out to, and it's really the people that you're like you have a very clear think of me when. So, tell me what does
Mhm.
that mean? The think of me when?
Yeah. Instead of what normally happens, which is when I get on the phone with a candidate and it's more of an intro call. It's not a call I'm leading necessarily. It's more of a, hey, just wanted to chat so I can be on the radar for the future. Typically, I'd say 90% of people are like, let me tell you about myself. And then they go through their resume job by job. And it usually takes about 20 minutes. And I'm not left with that much that's memorable. And I can see their resume, I can see their LinkedIn. But what I need to have a sound bite in my head of like, when I talk to that hiring manager a month from now, and they're like, look, we are going to be a software as a services company. We've been around for 30 years. We've never made that transition. And now we're going to do this and we're investing in it. We just did this and that to set things up. We need a new person to take us there. I'm thinking, okay, who's done this before? Who's taken companies on that journey? So if people speak in a way where they're where I understand their level, the types of people they influence, their seniority, the problems they solve, and where they've done that before. I'll be like, who's that person I talked to from that company who totally took them through that thing? And then I'll go and find them and look through my inbox. And those are the people that I call first.
Great. And I think that it's good to show some examples of, and these aren't like verbatim statements they'll talk about, but like a description of what is a think of me when kind of positioning. Yeah, I'd love for you to talk through like what's good, what could be improved about this version, and I'll read it out first. This is from a product manager I was thinking of specifically, and the first way I would put this is think of me when your company is at a critical growth stage and needs a product leader who can deliver fast results. If you want to scale your SaaS startup, launch global teams, or launch new products, you need someone who can take your vision and make it happen across teams and markets. And this is a very common way I've seen people write, especially in like the about section, for example, of their LinkedIn. So what's good and what's bad about this?
I do think, I mean, I can put this person in a bucket, so that's good, versus it being a lot of fluff words that everybody could have on their profile. I'm a team player, I'm collaborative, those sorts of things. So at least it doesn't have that. But at the same time, I would say what I really need to know about this person is like what makes this personal to you? What are you doing differently versus if you're thinking about your peer who could say the same exact thing? What are they doing versus what you're doing? And so I need a little bit more just so that they can stand out to me personally, because it is still a little bit vague.
And I'm going to read this one, which is a little bit more specific to this person. So think of me when your SaaS product is growing beyond initial traction. It needs to scale from 10 million to 100 million ARR in probably over 10 PMs. Or when you want to transition a consumer product to an enterprise product. I have led product expansion efforts, transforming single product companies into multi-product platforms, capturing new markets, and securing larger deals. I've built enterprise teams from scratch to 60 plus across geos, landing Fortune 500 clients. I've been a product leader for 15 years and founded 2 startups before growing to be a CPO at a unicorn. My strength is guiding companies through key inflection points, shaping strategy, launching new go-to-markets, building new team capabilities, scaling operations, and driving growth across SaaS product lines. So what's good and bad about this one?
I absolutely love this. I really do. You can tell between the past one and this one, like now I can put you clearly in a place in my mind of the size of company, the single to multi-product, the consumer to enterprise, like all these things. Like when I'm working on a new role, these are the problems that I'm trying to solve for the new hiring company. And so this, I'm like, yes, okay, cool. And you're answering all my questions. How about your teams? Okay, what kind of people do you have, and what have you done? And was your company successful? I'm going to say it. I don't always know if your company was successful. I actually have to do a lot of work to figure that out. Don't make me do that work. Like I have to click on your company. And then if your LinkedIn page for your company is like, meh, I'm like, I still don't know that if you Google your company. And so like they just put it out there. Like we were successful. Yeah, I really, really like this one.
And just, I'm not going to go through this, but you can feel free to take a screenshot and I'll share the slides later. But here are a whole bunch of different attributes that you can use to differentiate yourself. If you're trying to think about what's the intersection of things that makes me special, years of experience, company pedigree, people know those ones. But the size and stage of your company, explicitly state that. The team leadership, like how many, from where to where, not just like I had 100 people, but did you hire 50 of those people? That's a really important point. What's your product management archetype? And I have a whole guide and a quiz on that online. Market, product, business model, so fintech, SaaS, is it consumer, is it SMBs? Problem solving expertise, so that's an important one that Somer talked about, right? Like when you're launching a new product to your product line, maybe it's your second product, or maybe you're hitting scale problems, or you're having some technical challenge, or you're trying to launch a very technical product. These are all very specific, like transformations or journeys that you have taken a company through, and that's when companies typically hire these roles, and that's when Somer comes in and has to go find someone who's done it before. Culture fit is another one. This is a harder one to like explicitly state, but it's kind of implied. Are you typically in like engineering driven companies? Do you thrive in that, or are you in product driven or more ops driven, sales driven organizations? Because how you fit in that culture will matter as a product leader. And then titles, tenure, career progression, that's pretty much on your resume to see that you're growing. So the power of think of me when, I think that this is really important, Somer. So like why is the think of me when statement, like in the way that you deliver this message to a recruiter and all the different touch points, why is it important?
Yeah. So I think the goal in general is for people to be at the position that you were at, where you could ignite your network, you had leads coming to you, and versus you're like, I'm looking, now what? Ugh, and knocking on doors. So being thought of, being memorable, having lasting impressions, all these sorts of things, it'll just help. I get an email, I'm like, oh yeah, I love that person. Of course, let's catch up. So yeah, it's all about relationship. And I wanted to add, I loved what you just said about, I think reflecting about less like roadblocks and what made things hard is what makes people stand out from others. I think so often people rattle off all of these accomplishments, but the people that really stand out are like, and here's what I walked into, and here's what I had to overcome. And it was a journey, but here's how I did it. And here was our result. And not many people actually talk through the roadblocks. And I think that's like the magic in being memorable too, in that
Great.
journey.
So just looking at the time, I'm going to move forward here to some more tactical things. So we talked about LinkedIn profiles and what you search for, but when you're actually screening a LinkedIn profile, there's some like very important to-dos and not to-dos, right? And don'ts. These are some of the ones that I've found very as the first pass. Generic headlines. So a lot of people will say things like seasoned product leader. When you actually show up in the search and your headline says seasoned product leader, we don't know then very easily what's your actual title? What company are you at, right? And so saying something that generic is very hard. So VP of product at Built, I would, first of all, if the company is as well known as Built, that's great, like Built Rewards. But you can also add on some things after it, but make sure that they're specifics, not generic wishy-washy terms. Like scaling 100 million ARR SaaS fintechs is one I've seen recently. A lot of people have long narrative bios with a lot of fluffy language. We talked about how to write one that's a little bit more specific. And there's an example here that you can look at, and avoid cliches and subjective language. So customer oriented, detail oriented, built strategy, led diverse teams. Sure, but anyone can say that. What are things that only you could say, and focus on those? All right, I want to see how Somer actually looks at LinkedIn profiles. So we still have about around 50 people still on the chat here. So is someone willing to put forward their LinkedIn link here? And I will pull it up and we can have Somer take a look at it. We might be able to do two if we have time, if we can. All right. I'm not going to do Paul's because I think Paul's will be too easy. I'm going to do someone I am less familiar with here. Let's see. All right, Bruno, thank you, by the way. Ooh, let me close that. Bruno, thank you for sharing your profile here. Somer, are you able to see this all right?
I can. Yes. I'm on the hot seat, so let's do it. Yeah. All right. So what I'm looking at, I'll talk versus sure. Just use my head. Okay. So I'm looking at your name, looking at your photo, looking at all these titles. I'm just thinking that's a lot. So I'm trying to figure out what you do. Senior head of product, chief product officer. So okay. So you're a senior product person and you're trying to capture all the different titles and levels, because I know that titles mean different things everywhere. You're in Canada. And now I'm skipping, and I'm honestly skipping the about, and I'm going straight to experience, and I'm looking at where you work, how long you've been there, seeing your title, and just trying to get an idea overall. Okay, global head, product director. I'm just like looking at titles and companies. Now I click on show all 10.
Oh, down here. Yeah.
Yeah. I like to see where people started out. I do think that people's foundational years kind of makes them who they are. So it's cool that you're engineering, project manager. Like then I start looking bottom up. Then you took on product and eng, and then CEO and founder. That's interesting. Now product director, head of product. All right, cool. All right, then I go back. So I know it's kind of all over the place. This is how I
when
look
you're
at
looking at the companies, like what's going through your mind when you see a company like, especially because this is in Canada, so maybe companies you don't know.
Yeah.
Right away,
So
if they
now,
are.
yeah, I don't know these companies. So now I'm going to go to about to see if he told me.
This about up at the
Yeah,
top.
the about section up top where he wrote experienced executive with 20 years experience, leadership strategy product, digital. Yeah, so it's a little high level, and I don't know really what role you're going for. And I'm assuming you're looking for a job if you added your LinkedIn just now. Sometimes people are on LinkedIn and they're not looking, which is totally fine. But this isn't, I think, specific enough as to the problems you solve or where you add value compared to other product leaders out there. So now I'm going to have to do a little bit of work and I click on the Apply Board company page just to understand, because you've been there for 3 years, so that's significant, just to understand what they are. Okay, 1,000 to 5,000 people. Okay, so at least now I have access education. And so typically now I'm just thinking, like, I'm looking at your profile for a reason. So I'm thinking, okay, do you check off the boxes of what I'm looking for in terms of certain size companies, certain journeys that companies have been on?
Yeah.
I'm just
So
looking at
if
the
we were
bullets
looking
under
for,
Apply
let's say
Board.
it's a Series D consumer marketplace company.
I'm just looking at the bullets under Apply Board now. I just hit more so I could see them.
So this is a question that a lot of people have. Should I put this many bullets, which is like kind of the bullets they have on their resume? Should I put that in LinkedIn? Is that helpful to you here?
I think this number's fine. I might try to do 3, but I do think that you could benefit from having just one first bullet about like why did Apply Board hire you? And like what would the CEO say about you? Like you joined because of you, we got the company here. Because I without knowing, I have to basically place you like I have a piece of a puzzle. Like you're a piece of a puzzle, but I don't have the box top. Like I need the box top. I need the picture to know where to put the piece. So when you're saying your pieces, I don't know if that's you doing all of the things, like do you report to the CEO and you are that person, or are you a few levels down and you're one of many product leaders there? I'm just not
I think
sure.
that
And
the
usually,
takeaway role has a sentence like that at the top. What does that look like? Both that one and the product director, the previous 2 roles.
what was your question?
Oh,
What?
sorry. Are those because there are those types of sentences for the next 2 roles down?
Oh, there
And
are. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So I'm just curious if that's what you meant.
Yeah. Yeah, I like those. Just the one quick sentence, just placing you in the org. And I think I was spending a lot of time on Apply Board because you have been there for 3 years. And so I do think it's if it was like a year or less, I'd probably skip it and just spend a little bit of time and then look at where you spent more time. But since that's 2 years, that's 10 months. I probably wouldn't put as much emphasis on 10 months. Of course, it's holistic, but I do think,
Okay. So
yeah,
we're definitely over time, and I
yeah.
want to get to the magnetic statement and the final questions from folks. So we will share this recording with the folks who weren't able to join us for the full hour. But please, I want you to do the following writing assignment for the next 3 minutes. So talk again. Think about who you work for, the journey the company would be hiring you for, and where you've done that before. So this could be either in the form of the about me statement in LinkedIn, or it could be what you would say in a blurb in an email. But quickly type that up. It could be in bullet form if you want. And I'd love to see some of those in the meeting chat and we can give some feedback on them. So you have 3 minutes to write out your magnetic statement. And I'm going to pull up that slide with some of the example things that you can add in there. Here was it. We'll give 30 more seconds just for the sake of time here. All right, let's get some of those submissions in. How about this? How about we start taking some questions in case people need more time to type, and then we can take those questions. And as you start finishing your statement, you can type it into the chat, just so you have enough time to do that. The last thing I want to go over here is just a quick point on whenever you do outreach. And we'll show some recent outreach that Somer's got recently, but make sure you start with giving and not taking. So there are a few things you can give to an executive recruiter in terms of value first. You can give market knowledge. I'd love to hear what that is, Somer, but we'll take some questions first before we go into that. Roles that you didn't land, so leads and potential clients. I think that's an interesting one to give. And the last one is one that most people think about, but not enough people actually do, which is refer other people, great people you know. If you know other great leaders and someone, recruiters reaching out to you, as Somer said, for a specific role, it might not be a fit for you, but have that conversation. You get a chance to build that relationship with that recruiter, and you can potentially give them some other folks that you know in your network for that role, and they will appreciate that. And I will give you these slides later, and you can see some examples of what a taker type note to Somer looks like and what a giver type note looks like. But let's just say that the giver notes are sharing recommendations for other folks, and the taker notes are just asking to place me in a role. And then good outreach and bad outreach. So, Somer, do you want to talk about this one very briefly?
Yeah, no, this is Colin had asked me to go through some more recent examples, and I went through my inbox, and someone must have sold my name as Ms. Upload to somebody. I get so many of these, dear Ms. Upload, but not only that, it's just the message itself is just a lot of just a lot of words, and as given what we talked about earlier, I can't really tell exactly what this person does. So yeah, just not a great example. And I think ultimately it comes down to like it's not written to me, but it's not written in a way that someone normally speaks. In the land of so many generic emails, I think it just takes a second to make something personal to really stand out.
And then here's a good one. So, what's good about this one?
So I love this. It says, allow me to introduce you to this person. He's a friend, former colleague from the company. He spent 20 years there and he's been in this new place and he's at the intersection of this thing at both places and introduce him to your book. So anyway, this email came from a client, a past client of mine. And so I think as a recruiter, I care so much about the gold stars that people are put. Like if Colin sends me a candidate, I'm like, you know what? That's a good candidate. I can trust that that's a good candidate. So this, of course, not only will I respond because, well, I respond to all my emails, to be honest, but not only will most recruiters respond because it's from a client, but also I know that this client's only sending me good people. So I think if you want to be in that top 5, top 10, being remembered, being thought of, being endorsed by someone who has credibility just is huge.
All right. Yeah, and there's some examples there, which I'll share in the slides later. And the big one is be nice. Always be nice. Don't be rude.
Goes both
Even if
ways.
yeah, it goes both ways. You'll have rude recruiters. Be very patient with them. You'll have processes where they ghost you, where they're reaching out for the same role twice. Like all of these things will happen. And just give a lot of grace because these relationships matter in the long term. And you can't say that you've never had a bad day at work. We'll talk. We won't talk about how to be the top candidate here, but here are some things that you can talk about what a recruiter is actually looking for when they're doing that first call with you. So feel free to refer to this slide later when you are preparing for an interview with a recruiter. And let's talk a little bit about, and here are some do's and don'ts for those calls. So one thing I did want to say is don't soapbox. Biggest thing, if you're answering a question, Summer said this and it just triggered me because I hear this all the time. It's one of the biggest things I do for my coaching clients. If you're answering a question, answer it with something you did, not what you would do or should do in a specific situation. They need to give an example back to the client, not a hypothetical. All right, great. We'll talk tonight about networking outside of search firms, but do we have any more questions, Mo, from the audience?
We have one from Lily about titles. So companies use them very inconsistently. How do you recommend addressing titles that appear lower in rank than the actual responsibilities? And there was an earlier relevant question, let me see this, from Dan, who asked, what about down leveling from director to principal? Is that a red flag or is that pretty normal nowadays?
Yeah, I think titling is so inconsistent. So I think most recruiters don't put a ton of weight. And I think I'm thoughtful about like, am I going to reach out to a director at a FANG company for this thing? Like, I know what their comp's going to be. And, but if it's other companies where titling is just unknown, I think what you can do is you can put just one line of who, like, that's why I started out the Think of Me When with now like pegging it to who you help, who do you influence, who do you partner with, who do you have to get buy-in from. So if you're saying, look, I interface with the board, I report to the CEO, I'm influencing the CTO, I'm this and that, I think that'll just show your seniority. And I wouldn't worry too much about taking changes in title and stuff like that. It's explainable. The one thing I would say is that your headline doesn't have to be your current title. Your current title at your job, like sure, that should be your current title, but your headline is what shows up first in recruiter search results. So you can make that like if you want to put chief product officer, line VP product or something, like you could, even if you're not currently a chief product officer officially, your headline doesn't have to be, in my opinion, what you are today. Your title with your job, with your company does. I would say a little more freedom there.
Yeah. And in terms of titles at the companies you're applying to, because they asked also about like a lot of
Mm,
companies are trying to downrank you from director to principal and IC type roles.
mhm.
100% it's true. If you look at the data, I think now it's 14% of layoffs are now from executives, and it used to be like 5% in 2018, and it's just gone up every year. Orgs are flattening. It's just very common. And if you go and build something great as a principal, like a very senior product manager, and then you want to go back to being a leader later, they're going to respect you all the more for it in these days. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Mm.
All right. Any last questions before we go from
That's
the
pretty much
audience? All right, great. Well, this went way over. We have a learning for next time, but everyone will get the recording. So hopefully everyone will be able to get the full value out of this. Appreciated. Thanks so much, Somer, for taking the time. Let's talk about your book before we jump so people can jump on that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for being here. And thanks again, Colin. I love the engaged audience you have here. So yeah, so here's my book. You can find it on Amazon. And as Colin said, you can listen to it too. I finally got that done this year. It was inspired by conversations like this and folks like you. When I launched my own search firm, I said a month later it was COVID. So I just caught up with people and I found that people were incredibly frustrated or just found the whole search process very opaque. So I just wrote about it. Here's how it all works. I put so much research into this thing. You've no idea. I had this Excel spreadsheet. There's no chat GPT. So I wrote it. I had this huge Excel spreadsheet, all these interviews. I had to go through some corporate communications departments at clients to get it approved. So yeah, there's a lot in there. So yeah, hopefully you like it. So yeah, you can pick it up.
Great. Yeah, it is definitely the best book on the topic. And I'm going to be launching a Maven program on the product executive job search for later this month. It's a few weeks long, 32 hours of live workshops. We'll have guests from executive search firms as well as leaders, and lots of self-paced lessons and projects so you can actually get traction on your search. and I'll be sending out this coupon code later. But yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dave, for saying that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah. The recording now.